Terry's previous experience has covered a wide variety of contexts and industries. He's been the executive director of the Alberta Small Brewers Association and founding CEO of Calgary Arts Development Authority. He works on civic partnerships at the City of Calgary and was an assistant professor in strategy at the University of Calgary. Between gigs, he advises on boards and senior management on strategy and governance. Terry contributes to the community through volunteering on the TELUS Calgary Community Board and has served on the boards of Sled Island Music and Arts Festival, the Hillhurst United Church, Calgary Cultural Capital of 2012 and 2018 and 2016. Calgary hosted the Juno Awards and was on the founding board of C-Space Projects. He was the chair of AIESEC Canada Board, where he has been president in the early 1990s. Dr. Terry Rock holds a PhD in management with a focus on strategic management, entrepreneurship, and innovation from Texas Tech University, and a Bachelor of Commerce in Marketing with distinction from the University of Saskatchewan. Thank you so much for joining us, Terry. I will hand everything over to you.
Thanks, Kerry. Well, it's really great to be with a group of fellow travelers here today. Really excited to have this conversation with you. I've got some slides that I'm going to present, and then I'm really looking forward to having the conversation because as I was putting this together, one of the biggest challenges I have is there's so much going on in our city right now. This is a snapshot in time that's, it's probably 6 weeks old, and so it's out of date. So really looking forward to the conversation. So I'll share my slides. So I call this is a version of a talk I've given a few times, Calgary 3.0, when opportunity hits it. I think about this phrase, when blank hit, because whenever people talk about the pandemic, it's like I was doing XYZ and then COVID hit, and it hit hard, and it's still hitting, and we're all adjusting to it. And I think that metaphorically, that's sort of a way to think about what's happening to our city right now, is that we were kind of merrily going along, probably some people thinking about, well, we should maybe change some things or get on to some things around our economy. And then now we've got the pandemic, but also other changes are happening, and I think it's hit us. And so what are we going to do about it? I want to start with one of my favorite academic research pieces that I can remember is by Mary Tripsis. So those of you who are studying emerging technology maybe know Mary Tripsis's work. She's now a prof at UC Santa Barbara. And she studied the history of the typesetter industry, and she looked at the entire history of typesetting, which I'm sitting in a room with a laptop that's not plugged into anything right now, presenting to you on a typesetter like that. I'm actually okay. So speaking of technology, my earbuds like to turn off every once in a while, so that happens. I catch it, but so the typesetter industry went through multiple changes over its history, and Mary Tripsis tracked it. I love this photo because there's a gent at the back smoking a pipe as he's typesetting, and I'm sitting at my my mini Apple typesetter machine, and when she looked at the waves of technology that hit the typesetting industry, and then looked at how companies survived, she was able to pull some lessons out of this historical analysis about what companies had in place to allow them to survive multiple waves of new technology. There's a lot to her work, but one of the things that I pulled away from it was she talks about dynamic capabilities, the ability itself to see what's happening and to change effectively. And then also she talks about complementary assets. So things that you have that you put in place purposefully because you can anticipate that things are going to be changing, and so you then are better positioned to see what's coming, and then adapt as it comes to you. And so, it's quite sad if you look at the typesetting industry now. Mergenthaler linotype was started in the 1880s. If you go to if you try to search them now, what you'll find is a website that is linotype.com or something like that, where they sell Helvetica fonts. I mean, it has completely changed over time, but that brand and sort of some DNA of that organization still exists. So it's really interesting context to look at waves of technology, how they change things, and then what should we do about it. And so when I think about our city, a lot of what I'm going to talk to you today is about kind of pulling those two things together when emerging technology is happening, and then how is our city prepared to deal with that. Certain themes that I'll go through today. I think cities are engines of innovation. There's a lot of evidence to show, and some actually, one of the things I'm following a gentleman named Matt Clancy. I think everybody should be following him. He's actually tracking now even more directly how cities are, because of the proximity of people and ideas, how they are actually the drivers of innovation and why we should pay attention to that. Then I think that I want to look at Calgary in the context of our province, in the context of our country, and then globally, and how should we think about it. And then I want to talk about Platform Calgary and what we're doing here, and how all of that is part of a shared prosperity agenda for our city. So let's start with cities being engines of innovation. I'll blast through some stats here. A lot of this is, by the way, from Startup Genome. So about 3 years ago, we started benchmarking Calgary against other places in the world to really see where we're at. A dose of brutal facts of reality to really show us where we're at. But I'll tell you a little bit more about where we are. But we really did need to understand sort of what's going on and how we position ourselves. So the first thing is that, when you think about tech startups, every industry is being disrupted by it. And really, the key thing here is that it's the #1 engine of economic growth and job creation. Cities around the world that have figured out how to do this, I may just ditch these headphones here for a second, cities around the world that have figured this out are growing faster than regions that are in old modes of thinking. And so that's a really important thing for us to understand as we make policy and think about how are we going to change our city over time. These are the facts. The cities that have figured that out are growing faster. Causation and causality may not be exactly lined up here, but it's a good story to take us to start from. The other thing that I think is interesting here is that these technologies are embedded in new businesses. So I think another thing we've learned is that it's really difficult for established industries, established companies to be the source of this change that we're talking about. It really does have to come outside of that broader institutional context and then be brought in, and that itself can be painful. So instead of just buying it off, it's not just about creating licenses of new technology, it's actually creating a business that then works to figure out how customers are going to interact with this technology and turn it into something that people really want. I'm also a big fan then of where is this coming from? And so say what you will about ARK investment. If you own their ETFs right now, you're probably in some pain. Because it hasn't been the greatest set of market conditions for ARK, but they have a really great sort of way of looking at disruptive technology or disruptive innovation and how it plays out across our society. I find frameworks like this to be useful because it can feel like a big sea of stuff going on, and how do you keep keep an understanding of it? So this is a framework that I like. There are other ones out there. And they break it down into these clusters of really, they think of them as platforms that are going to cause our wholesale shifts in how value is created and captured and how we live in the coming years. And so I don't need to dive into all of those because I think we kind of generally understand that these are the things that are on the surface coming at us. But this, I think, is what, to me, why it really matters is that this is sort of an economic historical view of how these kinds of platforms, similar kinds of platforms over history, have led to change in our society or in our economy. You can see them, they come at waves. But here we are with 5 or 6 of these platforms and sub-platforms all hitting at the same time. So it is inarguably a kind of fundamental realignment of how our society works, about how the economy is going to work, how we can create value and prosperity in our cities. It is a time when all of this is up in the air. So maybe we should get on it. Maybe we should pay attention to these things, and maybe we should have a very assertive strategy for it. And I'll sort of top this part off by saying that when you look at over long periods of time, how do we create new jobs? Large organizations are efficiency seekers, and so they don't create jobs. In fact, this study shows that, in fact, they destroyed jobs, and that red line at the top where net new job creation is coming is actually from young firms. They're inefficient, they're searching for markets, they are building out and expanding. So I think there's a lot of reasons for them when you think about what I just went over in terms of where what's coming at us, and then what our city has in front of it. We should really be paying attention to this. One of my favorite investors is a group out of Europe called Atomico, and I think that this sort of encapsulates that section where, you know, the challenges are getting bigger, the rewards are getting bigger, and so there's a huge opportunity to tackle these major problems, to take advantage of the technology that's coming at us, and the problems are there for us to solve. And I'm going to come back to why Calgary is so well positioned in this kind of a world. And then here's why entrepreneurs matter, because entrepreneurs are observing all of this. They're basically taking the current reality, rewiring it, and trying to create value. Now, we can argue this because I've seen my share of, I think of, you know, the Silicon Valley startups that are creating butlers for your dogs and things like that, and we can argue about whether people have their attention on the right things. But I think that the argument can be made that Calgary at least has a unique opportunity to focus on these big global problems. Here's another challenge, is that even though this is happening to us, most of the activity, most of the value is in these larger places. So it's very concentrated how it's all happening around the world. This is Startup Genome's mission, by the way, is to break the concentration by learning from each other. So we're part of a global network of cities that are trying to figure out how to create ecosystems and unlock this potential for our community. I think this is the final piece. Rise of the rest, to really think about what's happening here. Steve Case, founder of America Online, has this thesis that there are great companies being formed and these emerging technologies being harnessed to solve problems outside of Silicon Valley, New York, Boston, that there's a second tier of cities that are actually more efficient to do business in, that are easier to do business in, that kind of sit under the radar. And so there's a discoverability problem, which you're, from an investor standpoint, you're trying to find where to move your money, that it's hard to find these companies because they're scattered in secondary markets all over North America, around the world. His solution is create a fund specifically to find companies that are outside of the major metro areas, and to get in a bus and go find these founders and invest in them. And I think that in the Canadian context, being, depending on which ranking you look at, kind of in the 4, 5, 6 slot, that Calgary is a rise of the rest story. There's a lot undiscovered happening here. And the reason why it's hard to keep up is that we're starting to get discovered, and there's more and more happening. Our strengths are becoming apparent, and investment is starting to flow because we've found a way to get ourselves on the map. But I think this is an important trend that we can pay attention to, is that value is going to be created outside of Silicon Valley and New York and London. And there's no reason to think that Calgary can't be one of the top performers in this next year. So now let's think about Calgary itself in the context of Alberta, in the context of Canada, and then what could we do in the world? Okay, so early 1980s. Oil is at a peak. Calgary is the Canadian headquarters and arguably a North American headquarters city for the oil and gas sector. We're rocking and rolling. And in 1981, the Calgary Research and Development Authority was created. And that was created by industry leaders, mostly from oil and gas, to try to make sure that the boom would continue, that they could see technology coming, and that they knew that their sector had to be part of that story. And so how could they position themselves better to do that? Calgary Research and Development Authority was created, and that is our predecessor organization. So in 1981, this is a 40-plus-year-old entity that I'm now happy to be part of. In a couple of years after we were started, oil tanked, agriculture ran into some real trouble. There were buildings being built in downtown Calgary that no longer had occupants for them. It was a really grim time. And about 1985, our province decided to start working on diversification. So it was in 1985 that I think it was the Getty government put technology as an industry that Alberta should focus on onto the provincial strategy map and policy map. And so it was one of the industries that they decided to focus on. So I think it's kind of interesting that this organization and this sort of movement really gained a footing several years before it needed to, before it was a burning platform, before it was a big problem. We knew that we had to be on top of what was coming at us. And I think we had a good run. So that was the first wave. The second wave, sort of modernization of the oil and gas sector. And now there's another curve that needs to be jumped over onto. And this is where Guy Kawasaki talks about innovation is really jumping from one curve to another. And how is our city going to jump from the curve that we've been on onto the new one? Maybe we're midway through that right now. But I think it's kind of, what I like about this is historically, our city has shown that we can do it. We can think big, and we can see this notion that disruption is coming and we better be prepared for it. And what are we putting in place to make sure that we're going to thrive in that? That's what I think our job is at Platform and together. So here's the opportunity. I talked about how startups are really driving economic growth around the world and job creation. We think a lot about what are the jobs of the future. And so here's the good news, bad news story, is that Calgary is globally in the top 100 emerging ecosystems. Just last week, it came out, or was it this week? Time is a blur, that Calgary is a top 30 city when it comes to clean tech ecosystems. So I think that's really promising and interesting. But the reality is, in the Canadian context, we still could triple in size as a city and only be kind of equivalent to the leaders in this particular space of technology, startups, and innovation. So that would get us up to the ranks of Kitchener, Waterloo, Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver. That requires a tripling in size. So that's really, how we see our goal over the next 10 years is to do that work, to triple in size. This is work, this is a chart that's been created by Zinc Ventures in partnership with Platform Calgary and the A100 that shows what that would look like. And there's a distribution of companies at each sort of size that's articulated here. And then what that would do if we got to those, if we hit those numbers, how many jobs would be created, and what sort of, we can even think about what kind of GDP impacts would be. And at the bottom, these sort of pink, light pink at the bottom, that's where we are today. These are the number of companies that exist. And the next level up is where we need to be in 5 years, and the top is where we need to be in 10 years. Just draw your attention over here is that we're relatively low in terms of the percentage we need over the next 10 years in the early stage startups. Ultimately, that means we need to have much more dynamism in the startup and into scale space. That really early stage, get started, get something going, then becomes a 5+ person company and starts to grow in the market. And this is actually the logos of all of the companies that are on that map that I just showed you before. So this is, I know you can't see it. We could get you a physical copy if you'd like. It's a really interesting thing to put up on the wall and pay attention to all of these companies, each one representing an entrepreneur, a team that is getting up every day, mostly optimistically trying to build something that is ultimately going to create those jobs of the future. We really, you know, when I think about what my job is, I gotta know who those people are, what they need, and get them have this whole community, help the whole community come in behind them, so that then we can grow and create the Benevities and the Dirts and the Shaws, smart technologies of our community. So let's now talk about Platform Calgary. That's, I think, you know, I think cities are, I think that there's a lot going on from the technology side. We've talked about cities. We've talked about what's happening in our city from a tech standpoint. Let's talk about what Platform is doing about it. So our mission is empowering people building the next economy, and this really was almost an architectural dig of, okay, this organization started 40 years ago. Why did it start? What was it about? And that's the jump the curve slide I showed you, is kind of really articulating that. There's always going to be a next economy. There's always going to be new ways that we need to live together. And are we prepared for it? Or are we going to be like those typesetter companies that got wiped off when the new thing came along? I just think this is a really important way to think about our city. Are we prepared? And we think that the way you get prepared for that is by empowering people who are doing the work, the hard work of building the next economy. Shine a light on them, get them supported, help them with that really hard work. We get there. Calgary is a global hub for startups and innovation. We create tens of thousands of jobs of the future. And we become, we continue to be one of the most prosperous places in the world, and that prosperity is shared, not just concentrated in a few people. How do you do that? This is a challenging term that is loaded with jargon, but I think about accelerating the whole innovation ecosystem, the big parts and the small parts and everything in between. And our approach to doing that is to think about 3 key themes: place, programs, and partners. So place matters. And I think that even when I think about the MRU campus, there's been a lot of attention paid to place, about finding ways to create a welcoming community that gives people the tools and connections they need to succeed. And that's what we're trying to do at the Platform Innovation Center, where I'm seated right now. I'm sitting actually in public space that is 0 cost of entry to come in and start taking advantage of this community that's right here. We know that innovation centers build economies. We can look, we spend a lot of time as we were doing this looking around the world at successes and what impact they're having. One of my favorite in this one is actually Tech Quartier in Frankfurt. Frankfurt is a global banking city, big banks that don't move fast. And Tech Quartier quickly managed to get that global industry to start connecting with early stage tech companies. And as a result, they went from about 200 startups in that space to 600 in a very short period of time. I think, and it was because they were able to pull that whole hub together, and you can see that that's going to start transforming that economy. So Calgary just needs one of these at the end of the day. That's what this is about. Some more evidence that this is important. This is, again, is based on startup genome research, but if you do social network analysis, you can see that the more connected you are to other founders, to investors, to experts, to industry you can imagine, the more likely you are to be successful. And startup genomes data shows that highly connected founders grow bigger and they grow faster. So if we aggregate that to the whole ecosystem level, the more connected we can make our ecosystem, the faster we're going to grow, the faster we're going to get to that level of new jobs being created, building prosperity for more. I think you probably experienced this at MRU, but the first thing is that innovators make the place. Really, I can't wait. This place is full, so I can't do a presentation here because there's so many people doing things. Because it's just going to be an amazing place to hang out. When you look at the path of entrepreneurs, founders, innovators, you will find that people get inspired. It is truly taking a leap to start a company, to leave the safety of a job. Humans have evolved to go, like, if someone else did it, that gives me some confidence that I might be able to do it. So it's really important for this place, I know, is going to be a place where someone comes in that got the courage to take that leap and build a company that makes a difference. So I'm excited about that dynamic that's going to be here. So this is what it looks like. We've been open in a soft way for a few months now, just bobbing and weaving with COVID, but it really is purpose-built to kind of create these collisions and pull things together. The first floor where I'm sitting is a place for community. Again, all of this, aside from, I shouldn't say all of this, but this pink part here is about just an open door to the public. Innovation in Calgary now literally has a front door. It's right there. You get a coffee, you go start talking to people instantly. Over here is some workspace that will have main floor workspace. We hope that Plug and Play Alberta, the global accelerator from Silicon Valley, occupies that space, but conversations are still ongoing. The second floor is all about programs and partners. I think you saw this, this pitch stage here. So really important is this is the place where you go to tell your story, to build a community behind you, to get that support. And it is, you know, a stage in Calgary where that's going to happen now regularly. It's going to be actively programmed, and it connects you up to the second floor. The second floor has glass, and you can see into all of the stuff that I'm about to show you. So that is the pitch stage. Here we have an investor hub. Here we have a partner zone. So anybody that's working with entrepreneurs in the city can come and offer their programs, or at least meet their peers there. We have a theater space. We have office spaces, and I'm pretty sure that Ray DePaul and the MRU team is going to have a touchdown space here. We have a lounge. We have 2 classrooms, open space for cohorts for companies to work. Over here, we've got some new developments. We actually just announced last week that SVG Ventures Thrive is a global ag tech accelerator. They are going to work with us to build an ag tech innovation hub, agri-food, I should say, tech innovation hub there. So that's really exciting. Here we actually have KPMG is putting an ignition center. It's one of 2 in the world that is located inside a community-based innovation center. The other one is in Helsinki, Finland, in Maria, 01. So we're super excited about that. And then we have more touchdown space, potentially a media landing zone here for media to cover what's happening in our dynamic tech scene. And then our pitch stage, again, which is open to the public. So very exciting stuff. It's going to open soon. Even maybe more exciting is the fact that I can look across the street, see the Calgary Public Library. We now are working with them. We have an entrepreneur in residence in the Calgary Public Library. Down the street is the National Music Center, Studio Bell. We did a music tech accelerator with them. And we're just getting started over there at the City Hall. Again, a big source of potential opportunity for innovation is how we run our municipal government. So really exciting times, and really happy that MRU is going to have a flag planted here as well. I'm going to skip quickly through our programs because I think we're kind of up on time here. But we really thought about programs from a gap perspective. We really need to make sure that from the earliest stage of ideation, the next stage of launch, and finally as you scale, that there needs to be stuff there for you. The programming needs to be specific to the stage you're at, and it also, we can add even more value if we can make it specific to the sector you're at. And so these programs, we've been doing a lot of work to build out programs. This is how it kind of looks on as a framework and how we work. I think the other important thing about our programs is that they're based, the bedrock of the programs is a value set that promotes high trust and speed, velocity. And then finally a story, getting the word out. There's so much to tell about what's happening in our city right now. Yeah, a little bit of marketing. Junction, which was our pre-accelerator program that's now been recast into Alberta Catalyzer. But this is, a very young, early stage founder who went into this program, built for first-time founders, got what they needed, and built a roadmap for what they do. One of the great stories is we're working with very early stage companies. So Junction started in late 2018. I think this was our second cohort in spring of 2019. You see Project Recapture there. Project Recapture was just recently changed its name to Pay Shepherd and had a raise of $700,000. So we started working with them when it was, an idea and very, very early stage. And it's so great to see, and we've got a number of stories like this. One of MRU's own Terrence Singh with Flamingo is another product of the MRU program that was also part of our Junction program, and he's now on his second firm and building a really interesting company that's, I think, going to hire lots of people. It's just a sense of the scale and scope of what we do, and I think this gives you a sense of kind of where we fit. This is the 2020 numbers. We're just aggregating our 2021 numbers right now, but what's really interesting about 2021 is that number of 505 is going to be, I think it's going to be over 1,100. And in terms of money raised, it's in the tens of millions. So just in 1 year, these companies that we've been part of their journey have actually taken off, and we can see the potential in this. So it's really interesting to see. For context, in 2018, we worked with about 350 companies. 2019, 350, 2020, 500, 2021, over 1,000, and that's as a result of us adapting and moving into online and really trying to be much more targeted in how we serve the people that are part of our organization. And then all of this is the sort of exciting news that we've just partnered with Innovate Edmonton and a bunch of organizations across the province and created a single stream opportunity in pre-acceleration. So we'll work with 180 companies in depth over a 3-stage process every year now. And it really is designed to make it so that there's not a gap in the front end at all. If you're a founder in Alberta and you are going to put in the work, then we've got a place for you. This has just launched. Our first cohort of 35 companies is in about their 3rd week. And the final part of this, and the only way that we can possibly achieve this, is by working together with the community. And so Platform Calgary is an organization, but more than that, it is an aligned ecosystem, over 50 partners. That's actually 60 partners now, dedicated to supporting founders, investors at every stage of their journey. So it's almost a small P platform. I think it is a small P platform where you can come in and just get access to all of these partners. And so this is the list. It's big. It continues to grow. The work now is to turn this into an actual platform that is easily navigable. And I think that, if you just think about who gets an invitation to opening day right now, it's about 17,000 people that you can wrap an arm around with these entities that have all signed agreements with us. About 1/3 of these companies will actually be organizations will be on site with staff, and the others will be part of the community and using it and really be part of the kind of wayfinding that we're able to provide. The final thing, and just kind of, I guess, a bit of a thought provoker, is this is Calgary's economic strategy and the focus areas that it has. It's always a tough one, because should we be focusing in key areas like agriculture, energy, transportation, logistics? These are established clusters that exist, and when you have a cluster like that, you get sophisticated investors, you have sophisticated customers, you have global networks already existing. That is what is needed to build and grow a company. But we also see emerging areas, and take financial services as an example. Is Benevity a financial service? I don't know. Is Morgan Stanley ShareWorks financial services, which was Solium, Helsum, Cement? These are all fast-growing companies that are broadly in that space. Neo Financial as well. Would you have maybe 10 years ago or 5 years ago said, Calgary should really focus on building its fintech space? I'm not sure you would have done that as a sort of top-down strategy. So we do have areas of strength, and we should be trying to make these globally important. But we also have to have something that really pays attention to the dynamics of the whole community and is able to identify areas where there's emerging strength and add new resources to it. And so I think that's one of the roles that an organization like Platform can play, but that we all need to play, is to make sure that if you focus in on the innovator and the people around them, and when I think about the innovator, I'm thinking of investors as innovators, I'm thinking of corporate innovators, I'm thinking of innovative talent working within an organization. Pay attention to those people, and then I think the ecosystem kind of, you don't need to spend so much time trying to figure out which one of these should we focus on. When you find something, you can then add fuel to the fire. So I think this is a call to action, really, time for our city. We have everything we need. When I think about the change we have to make, where would you rather be in the world to do this? Would you rather be in a place that, I'm not gonna call out cities, but just think about it. We have some of the highest concentrations of private wealth in the world. We have some of the highest education levels overall in the world. We have the third most ethnoculturally diverse city in Canada. We have an entrepreneurial spirit. We have a young population. This is the place that can do this. So I think it's, let's do this. Let's create the future together. Let's build shared prosperity. Thanks. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Terry. I'm sure we're all feeling very inspired. I wonder if there's any questions from the group here. Feel free to pop your questions in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute or put your hand up. If you're not familiar with Google Meet, there's a little hand sign that looks like this. You can put that up, and then I can ask you to unmute. And then people don't talk over each other. I have a child I need to shoo away.
Melanie had a question. Will our building be available for corporate events? Yeah, that's a really great question. The answer is yes. It will be. When Ray DePaul is on our board of directors, and when we went through the exercise of determining, what the process of deciding to go all in and build this thing and take it on. I remember vividly a board conversation that said, "Will you host weddings?" And my answer was, did you meet at a Star Trek convention, or did you meet, or do you work for? Are you a coder? No, the real answer to that is that we're really interested in bringing people together and creating collisions. So that ultimately is the goal here. So when we think, one of the ways we think about the building is it's a hub of hubs. So we have an investor hub. We have startup education hubs and cohorts for accelerator programs. We have a corporate innovation hub. We have a stage that's going to host all kinds of events where people are learning about tech, or they're learning about ventures, about investment opportunities. And so that in that context, it's really important to have corporations be part of the space. Weddings, I'm not so sure.
Ray, You have a question?
I really hope that wasn't me that asked that question, Terry. If it was, it
No,
was
it
sarcastic. I'd love to, what I like to say is we need a lot more founders, but then we need 10 to 100 times more specialized talent that can support that founder on the journey.
Yes.
Any thoughts on perhaps the gap or the new type of talent that's required that perhaps the city hasn't been generating in the past?
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm going to go to a couple of things here. There's a book called Super Founders that I just recently read that was about what differentiates the founder of $1 billion company from other founders. And really, really great data set to look at that. And one of the things that wasn't a differentiator was whether they had a technical background. So whether you had a technical background or not didn't really play a role in that. Sorry to get to the, I'll get to your answer in a second. So the what did differentiate it was whether you had previous entrepreneurial experience. So how do you get to be a founder of $1 billion company is you're a founder of a $10 to $100 million company, and you learn the ropes. And how do you get to be that? Then you can just kind of see what it is. So there's that overlay of the what kind of talent is. I think that the overlay is, are we creating a culture of people, no matter what your sort of background is, that have the capacity to understand what an opportunity is, to rally resources and pull it together, which is ultimately the process of entrepreneurship. I mean, I think you have some theories about this, but how do you actually build that that kind of talent? Like, what's your intervention into the system so that's more likely to happen? So my theory is that you just have all kinds of exposure to people who are enthusiastic about it and willing to help. And so when we look at the successful ecosystems and you take the rainforest perspective on this, it's ultimately that people feel safe to do it because they have a community that's going to help them, and they do it generously, quickly, and it's almost promiscuous in terms of the amount of how fast this happens. And so then the other part of that is you need to welcome them in. So you need to have, like, that whole thing needs to be welcoming, and you really need to make sure you build that. So that's part of, I think, what's going to happen here. Increasing the social connections is going to surface this kind of community. So I think that's an important part of it. And now I get into sort of personal kinds of things. Like I was a business school professor, and I had 2 kids that could have gone into business school, and I encouraged them not to. I encouraged them to develop a more liberal arts approach to how they built their skill set, because I think that goes back to the notion that you're able to detect opportunities and see where you can fit, and then you can kind of follow your passion. The last thing that sort of goes along with that, though, on the other hand, is I've seen it in my kids, is the ability to sell yourself, sell an idea, which sometimes you think of sales training as kind of like icky. But I think that is the fundamental piece of the puzzle here, is that if you look at what's it going to take to grow a startup, people that are able to rally support through sales or persuasion or that kind of storytelling communication. It's trite, but I think that's the skill set that's required.
Thank you.
Thanks, Terry. Truman has...
I love what you're doing, Ray.
Truman, feel free to unmute.
Hi, Terry. Thanks for taking the time to talk to us. I was just wondering, does Platform Calgary have any plans to create like digital infrastructure to help like small businesses, um, you know, from like a bottoms up approach, create new innovations within Calgary? Like I see a lot of these tech platforms like PayPal, Skip the Dishes, they're really taxing Calgary small businesses to a level
Mm,
that like they're just going out of business to these larger franchises, and it's taken a lot of capital out of Calgary.
right. So basically, with the platforms that people are building businesses, so you're talking not necessarily small business, or sorry, not necessarily tech companies, but there's a market for the sole proprietor, small business, restaurant kind of thing, um, to more efficiently serve them so that they can prosper. That kind of idea.
Yeah, like the way I look at it is a lot of our digital infrastructure or the way that we move things
Yeah.
logistically is outsourced to other companies that
Right.
are sourced in other countries or other
Right.
cities.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what that does is it takes a lot of capital out of the city. So
Yeah.
would there be like any incentive for like Platform Calgary to create like, you know, smaller innovative projects that would just keep more capital locally, and that'll create more
Right.
incentives to create larger platforms for a larger population later?
Yeah. So I'm going to come at this two ways. The first thing is that we would really be looking to innovators to do that and try to support people that come at that problem. So there's a local startup that is called Local Shops, I think is what I think that's what it is. It's trying to aggregate local e-commerce and really promote local shopping. The chambers have done that to try to get sort of consumer direct as opposed to Amazon as an example, those kinds of things. So there's actually, this is a problem, like, so you've identified a problem that is kind of widespread, that is a lot of people have recognized that um, that this cost of doing business is problematic for a lot of small businesses. So it's not unique to Calgary, it's a global problem. And so what we're seeing is initiatives to try to solve that through startups trying to do it. So our approach would not be to specifically tackle that problem. It would be to look at whether there's a way for the Calgary community to kind of come together, or is there a startup that's working on that that can go through one of our programs to deal with it. The other one is that you could almost look at that from, you know, a civic policy perspective. And so I didn't talk a lot about this, but you know, we also try to advise the City of Calgary and the province and even the federal government on ways that they could create a policy environment that is more amenable to small business and in particular innovative small businesses. So that we might say, hey, City Council, let's create an innovation challenge around the prosperity of small business owners in Calgary. And I actually, MRU did exactly that with I forget what it was. Specifically, the experience economy was kind of where most of that was, and work with student groups. So that would be more how we would tackle it, as opposed to trying to create something ourselves. We're much more of a facilitator.
Great, thank you very much for your answer.
Thanks, Terry. Stephen has a question.
Hi, Terry. Hi, Kerry. First time caller, long time listener. Thanks so much for doing this. It's an awesome presentation. My apologies for my camera not being on, but I have this like grizzled old prospector look right now I really need to take care of. But my question is, what sort
No one's
of
judging.
oh, stop, Terry. Oh, stop. What sort of community-minded initiatives will Platform Calgary be doing to kind of engage the other creatives in this fine city? Like, will there be some spaces? Kerry and I used to work at Alberta University of the Arts. So will there be like spaces to kind of showcase the creative awesomeness of makers and artists and designers to kind of showcase their creations and maybe ways to liaise with startups and kind of showcase the creatives that are in this fine city, as well as I know I'm a member of the Calgary Game Developers Association, and we've been having some initial conversations on how to utilize the platform space or have some cool things in there as well too. So I think it's an awesome venue, and I think the utilization and the uses of it is great. And what are some cool ways that we can engage more creatives in the Calgary and scene?
Well, there's two parts to that answer. The first thing is we are wide open to ideas and want this to be a place that the community looks at and goes, ooh, we have an idea, and let me pitch you on it or bring it in. And if we're successful in creating the kind of environment that we want, that has to happen. So when we talk about the 65 partners that we've signed up, that's just the start of the community that we want to use the space. So the answer is the door is open to ideas, and I think even more than that is we're building an events team that is really there to help you activate that in a very turnkey way. Like, we just think that we take the small P platform side of this very seriously, and what is the friction that would stop you from just doing that is the question that we're trying to tackle, so that you don't have to, it's just yes. The answer is yes, and we'll figure out a way. We do have some dedicated spaces in here that we can activate for showcases. We see showcase events, and like the space that I'm in right now could quite easily be set up as a showcase venue for both short-term and long-term installations, or longer-term installations. So that's on the agenda, and it's again going to be driven by partners. We've got active conversations going with Calgary Arts Development Authority and the National Music Centre around creative industry intersections with tech, and what can we do in that space. We've just run one cohort, one and a half, I guess, cohorts of the Reverb program. We had one test group of 5 or 6 companies, a lot of them from France, which is an interesting thing. The Embassy of France is very keen on working with us here. And so Reverb is, I think it's about 8 weeks focused on, it takes our basic programming that we use in pre-acceleration, and then it adds an overlay of the music industry. So we have global mentors from the music industry, and the National Music Centre plays a key role in that, in connecting and advising. So, think of it as a platform that you can bring things onto and use as a service for Calgary, in both hardware and software kind of way. Just on Calgary Game Developers, we have had conversations, and we really, really want to see that turn into something. So encourage your colleagues to think big and bring it to us. So
I totally will. Thank you so much again. No, this is an awesome presentation, and I look forward to future conversations.
Yeah.
And now I'll play the quiet game.
Thanks, Stephen, for your question. We've got a question from German Voon in the chat there, asking about volunteer opportunities.
You bet. Yes, the answer to that, German, is exactly yes. So Startup Calgary is now part of the Platform Calgary family of initiatives. Our team supports it and runs it. And one of the things that we're working on now is, in COVID, it became much more challenging to create that volunteer kind of engaged type of activity. But when you see the size of the space, we're going to have a volunteer crew here to help with in-person events, but also, I think my presentation made it clear that a community of support is really important, and so that's a big part of it. And so the volunteers are going to be a core part of how we activate. That just isn't rolled out yet. We're just there's a lot going on, and so we haven't actually figured that out yet. But the answer is yes. It'll be revitalized, hopefully bigger and better, more rewarding for the volunteers.
That is an exciting opportunity for everyone to be able to participate. We've just got 2 minutes left, and I don't have any questions, so I'm going to ask mine if that's all right. I'm actually curious, with the data that you showed of the 505, it noted that 10% were students. I'm curious if that percentage is growing along with the numbers. And I'm curious about how, if we've got students in the room, how can students get involved and how can they find out about what's happening at Platform? And maybe this is also a question for maybe Diana and Ray to answer with regards to the kinds of activities that Matt Royal is going to be having at Platform.
Yeah,
so questions.
I'll give you a quick answer to that. I think that number is actually, so what's interesting in our model is that we are collaborate first. And so a lot of that student participation in 2020 was because of a very specific program that we put in place with, I think it was U of C and MRU, and then we do some work with the Hunter Hub and others sort of as a service provider for free. We do pitch coaching and things like that. And that because the universities have become so good at serving this need in the community, there is less need for us to do heavy lifting. So I think that number actually, from a formal perspective, might go down, but I think from an overall ecosystem perspective, it's going up, which is our win. Like, we don't need to have those things go to our brag sheet. It really is about what's happening in the community, and I think the evidence is pretty clear that programming involving students and entrepreneurial activity among students is growing. So I don't know if Ray wants to talk about that, but the other thing that we're trying to do here is create a bit of a hub where it's a zone where any student can come regardless of their institution, and the institution is here to help them, but so is the broader community. We get to be that sort of intersection space.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add, Terry, is you mentioned Flamingo and Taryn, and the other co-founder's name is Gio. To me, this is perfection. They actually attempted to start a business while at Mount Royal. They received funding to do so. They learned a lot. Both of them had to actually shut down those businesses. They didn't work out, but the two of them looked at each other and said, why don't we do this again together? And they've raised almost $2 million, and they're on their way, now being supported by the community rather than just the university. So I think this opportunity to try your first time while you're a student supported by your university, I think is a really unique opportunity for students.
That's a lovely story for us to end our session on today. That's a great example of the ecosystem and that support beyond the institution for alumni and for that kind of journey that entrepreneurs take. Thank you so much for joining us today, Terry, and for sharing all of your knowledge. Thank you to everybody who joined us with those great questions. We really appreciate it.